Well, Brazil's finance minister says the Trump administration's tariffs are, quote, more favourable than he expected, but that there is still a lot of injustice in the measures. Trump's order adds a 40% levy on Brazilian goods, bringing the total up to 50%. The tariffs affect coffee and meat, two major Brazilian exports, but exempts hundreds of other products. So on Friday in Sao Paulo, demonstrators gathered outside the US Consulate. They claim that Trump is using tariffs to force Brazil into dropping the trial of his ally, former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. With the US as Brazil's second largest export market, how serious is the economic risk? I put this question to Welber Barral, an international trade specialist and Brazil's former Secretary of Foreign Trade.
Well, so there's a huge risk for Brazilian economics because, first of all, we export 11% of total exports to the U.S. So Brazil is not so dependent on the U.S. market as Mexico or Canada. But on the other hand, we have some sectors that have the U.S. as the main market, like coffee, for example, or beef, or other commodities. So a measure like this can really block Brazilian exports on these products.
What diplomatic or economic leverage, then, does Brazil have in this situation?
Brazil tried to negotiate first. And of course, Brazil has other things that may interest the United States, like critical minerals, for example. Brazil exports some very crucial minerals like lithium or others to the United States. So that's one leverage. The second one is that as the main provider of some foodstuff, probably there will be some inflation in the U.S., especially coffee and beef we are the main providers. Just to give an idea, 30% of the coffee consumption in the U.S. is provided by Brazil. And lastly, Brazil has a very tough retaliation law. So Brazil could retaliate not only on tariffs, but also on intellectual property and services. So that's the threat that made the U.S. negotiate with Brazil in the cotton case 10 years ago.
Now, is Trump driving then Brazil towards, say, other big markets, for example, China, the EU, or other trading partners?
So China today is the Brazilian main trading partner. 30% of the Brazilian exports go to China. And then we have the EU. Certainly, Brazil will try to promote more trade with these partners on one hand, but also it will divert the export to Latin America. Most industrial goods that Brazil exports go to Latin American countries. And of course, Brazil is working to move on with the EU-Mercosur agreement that could open more the EU market for Brazilian exports.
Now, tell us how this is affecting, we'll say, domestic politics at the moment in Brazil, because President Lula calls the tariffs a violation of Brazil's sovereignty, and also could this trade dispute influence, say, Bolsonaro's trial, Jair Bolsonaro's?
Well, first of all, it has influenced Lula's popularity. Like other presidents in Mexico or in Canada or Australia, in fact, those who oppose Trump are gaining popularity. That happened to Lula in Brazil. So he had a lot of social support. I don't think that is going to influence Bolsonaro's trial. The Brazilian judicial power is extremely independent. So they are not going to consider that, but they are not going to negotiate anything related to the Brazilian judicial independence. So I don't believe that sanctions, for example, like Trump imposed on judges in Brazil, are going to affect, for one side or the other, the final judgment in the Bolsonaro case.
All right, we're going to leave it there, Welber, but great to have your insights and analysis there. International trade specialist Welber Barral joining us tonight from Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's get more on this now from political analyst Thiago de Aragao. He is a senior associate with the Americas program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thiago, it's good to have you with us. President Lula is framing this as an attack on Brazil's sovereignty. Is it?
Well, President Lula is loving everything that is happening. His popularity was plummeting before these tariffs came on, before the actions from Bolsonaro's son publicly stimulating the US and defending that the US applied tariffs to Brazil. And he has already been collecting positive results on the polls, on his popularity. And naturally, he's going to stand with this narrative of sovereignty, which for him is very, very important. Although there is an underlying effect, and the letter from Trump makes it very clear that he is open for a technical trade negotiation. But for Lula, it's important to make this matter as political as possible.
Do you expect this trade tariff policy, a campaign, I mean, people are calling it a campaign, to actually influence the Bolsonaro trial?
Absolutely not. And I've spoken with several advisors at the US government, and they know that there is nothing that's going to happen there. They know that President Lula, even if he wanted, he would not be able to change anything going on in the trial. If you have a country like the United States affecting a trial at the Supreme Court in Brazil, this would create a legal precedent in Brazil that would be affecting thousands of cases, and it would create a legal chaos in the country. So Brazil knows, the US knows, that the case against Bolsonaro is a hook that it's being used by the US in many negotiations with Canada. Canada is the 51st state, annexation of Greenland when talking with Europe, taking control of the Panama Canal when talking to Panama, fentanyl with Mexico, reverse apartheid in South Africa when talking to them, taking away military troops from Japan. So every country, and Trump wrote this in his book, every negotiation, he brings in a decoy. This decoy generates anxiety and forces pressure upon the technical trade negotiation.
All right, well, let's take the decoy out of the picture for a second. The United States is Brazil's second biggest trading partner after China. So how hard could these tariffs, how hard could they hit Brazil's economy?
It can hit hard. The expectation was a little bit worse. The list of exemptions was positive under the Brazilian eyes in comparison to what Brazil was expecting. It was also expected that he would leave specific sectors out, like coffee and beef, or else there would be no negotiation. So the fact that he left two sectors that currently possess a lot of influence with the Brazilian government indicates that that the negotiation is now open. And his Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, has mentioned in the past 48 hours the interest in rare earth minerals. So there is a combination of elements being formed right now for the conversation that will lead to eventually an agreement being made in 30, 60 days. But if it fails, if the negotiation fails, it can hit hard the Brazilian economy up to 0.5 to 0.7% of the GDP.
President Lula says that he plans to rely on diplomacy. I don't think that he is talking about Trump's deadline diplomacy here, but what leverage does Brazil have at the negotiating table? I mean, you mentioned rare earth elements. I mean, is that the leverage that Brazil has walking into the negotiating room?
That's one of the leverages that Brazil has. Brazil is a country that traditionally already tariffs very highly anything that comes from abroad. So, for example, if you're going to buy an iPhone in Brazil, the Brazilian typical tax upon the product is over 100%. And this goes on to several US and European products in Brazil. So it's natural that there is a margin of maneuver in there as well for Brazil to work with. Also, Brazil is extremely protectionist of its industry, and this would be a very tough negotiation with the domestic producers in order to remove some of these barriers in exchange for lowering tariffs with the United States. Brazil is also very well equipped in terms of retaliation. coming up with a possibility, which is not officially mentioned by the government, but it would be very new in the face of retaliation that countries could eventually do towards the US, which is breaking patents of pharmaceuticals in Brazil. If this happens to happen, this would be a major capability of retaliation from Brazil. But I see this as a worst case scenario type of situation.
Thiago, let me ask you before we run out of time, if we zoom out here, what message does this send to the rest of South America, Central America, about how the U.S. uses its economic and trading superpower?
That the United States will bring in a political, social, geopolitical element for pressure. This pressure will create anxiety, and that the negotiation tends to be on the trade level. Trump promised 90 deals in 90 days. He's running out of deals right now. He needs those deals made, and he will bring in those decoys to make pressure. For the countries, is maintaining the line on the technicality, avoiding any political confrontation, and at the end of the day, once they get the deal made, probably the political issue will just be diluted with time.
Okay. Political analyst Thiago de Aragao. We appreciate your time and your valuable insights tonight, Thiago. Thank you.
Thank you.